Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about AWS S3, Glue, and Athena AWS services. Essentially, we're building a data lake. Um, for those that haven't heard that before, you have databases, data lakes, data warehouses, just different sizes of data. Today is, I would say, relatively small, but still representing what a data lake could be, right? So what's the purpose of huge data lakes, warehouses, things like that? It's really so that you can obviously store the data, but you also want to query data. You want to basically build analytics, dashboards, things like that. Be able to visualize data. So today we're focusing on NBA players. And if you dive into the script here, let me make sure I switch. I'm going to say this out loud. It might be a little tedious. But I just want to make sure that I say it out loud because I don't want to forget. I've done this like 3 times and I've forgotten a few times. Okay, so moving on. So basically, this is the script. I had this one pulled up because I was trying to speak on why we don't use self in here when I borrowed some code. These 2 lines basically. And so one of the problems I ran into was checking to make sure the S3 bucket exists. Alicia, she's totally awesome. I didn't notice that she mentioned it in the video, so she mentioned that some of the code does this, and when I looked through it, there was a sleep command for 5 seconds that, from her perspective, stated that it would check to make sure that it exists, and I think it's just giving a delay to make sure that it does create the S3 bucket. But I wanted to make sure that when I'm coding things that I'm really trying my best to do best practices, right? So for example, environment variable, especially for the API key, the security best practice. And then you get in here to S3 glue. So most of this was obviously provided by Alicia. Shout out to Alicia. And then, but I really wanted to make sure this was here. It was used in day one, which is why I had this pulled up, but you can see that it uses self. So I was trying to explain, like, why are we not using self? And it's because it exists within a class that's initialized. And so you have self. I'm still learning about that. But anyways, there's no class, so we're not initializing self. So therefore we don't need to do that. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Everything else is the code that was provided. I did substitute the normal exception for client error utilizing the Botacore exceptions library as I was trying to troubleshoot. You could obviously do without this and use the original exception. I just kind of left it in there. So the rest of this is going to be, again, what you can see here in the README. It kind of goes over what you're going to do. And obviously this is where the code comes from. So here's the diagram where it shows you overall it's using AWS Glue. It actually, now that I realize it, actually built this incorrectly. And what I think I should have done is I should have included the API. I think I was doing it because when I looked at the README, was it the README? No, it was her video. Her video, I pretty much just matched it. I built it myself. Let's see who's going to let me do this. I did build it myself, but lesson learned: the API key needs to, or API needs to be in here. So essentially, it would go like right here. I can actually update it and fix it. I'll do that later. So basically, you have to, if you look in here, essentially all we're doing is creating the AWS resources. And then there's a function here that goes and grabs the data from the NBA endpoint, which we have defined up here. And it's in the environment variables, right? So this is slightly different because we hard-coded the endpoint, the API endpoint, in the code in day one. And you can see right here, we hard-coded this. And I think, did we do it in day 2 also? Yes. Okay. So you can see that in this API endpoint, we're introducing essentially information that we want to select, right, in the API. In this example, we're doing today's date and then the API key. But the reason why I wanted to bring it up is just to show that like this is just there's many ways to do it. So in this case, we're using a request to use get function. There's the endpoint and the headers. So the headers, I'm not sure exactly what this is. It just could be specific to what's required for the sports data API, and then it provides the API key. So it just puts that in the headers of the request, and then it says, hey, if there's any errors, raise for status to get those errors. But if nothing happens, give us the JSON, right? And then there is a function that takes the JSON and says, hey, I don't want big JSON objects. I want to break them down line by line. So that's what this does. Very simple inline return statement and for loop there. And then we want to take that data that was line to limited, and we want to essentially put that into a put object. We want to build an object with the bucket name, the file key, which is essentially just a string, raw data, NBA player data.jsonl, line delimited, I think is what that is standing for. I just realized that now. And then the body is line delimited data. So this is actually the data that's going to be inside the JSON object, and it just writes it to the file. So then we have this function here that creates the glue table. And so this is for the data. So it creates the player ID, first name, last name, team, position, points. You can understand the data. And then it's saying, hey, here's some information for you. Here's where the bucket is. Here's the location of the raw data. And then that's basically it. And so the table type is external table. And then we dive into configuring Athena. So in Athena, we create the client. We create the query string, create database if it doesn't exist, NBA _ analytics. I think... No, that's right. So, okay. And this is just the table for the database for querying, right? And then query execution context. Some of this stuff I still need to learn and understand what this does. Ideally for me, the thing is when I'm doing these, I'm trying to learn how to use AWS, right? But with the different services, it just depends on your use case. For me, I just wanted to learn how to do it. That's what I'm trying to take out of it, instead of just granularly understanding each individual service. I feel like that's a bigger video in and of itself, which when I'm done with this challenge, I do want to take everything that I've done and try to find a way to get data and do like individual projects that kind of in depth go into each service. So that's kind of what my main plan is. So if you notice, I'm like kind of speeding through this and I'm not really kind of talking about what each service is. That's mainly why, because the best way I learn is I am able to dive deeply into it, get really into the nuts and bolts, right? So like that's kind of just the way I do it. And it's how I learn. I usually learn best by making mistakes. So test environments and dev environments are great. Okay, and that's basically it. So then we have the main function here as well. And then we just call all of the necessary functions. And then here it says, hey, NBA data equals fetched data. And then if we go back to fetch data right here. So you would think this would be like a true or false, like a Boolean. But I think what it is saying, hey, if it's empty or if it's, something, I think that's, if it's successful is my understanding based on this conditional statement. Then we upload it and then create the glue table and configure Athena. And that's basically it. So what I really want to do is talk about, I just wanted to go through this real quick, but what I want to do is, and then there's also the delete resources. So essentially all this does is it deletes everything that we created basically, right? So I had some problems, and then I added some things that I felt were necessary, and then I had some takeaways. So let's talk about the problems. So IAM role and Cloud Shell. So I had a lot of issues, not with the code provided. Basically, there was missing permissions, but like my my main, I'll just switch to me. A lot of the main issues that I had were just learning how to use the system. Um, you know, they've stated that they're not trying to give us like granular tutorials. So, and this is not a tutorial either. This is just me documenting what I'm learning. So if you take value from at least the mistakes that I've made, the things that I've found, that's the kind of stuff that I want you to kind of take away as a viewer. Um, and then be able to read my Medium articles and just it's more so like follow my journey and see how it goes learning skills, tools, stuff like AWS, cloud engineering. So this was the provided let me go make sure I go back. This was the provided JSON file for the IAM role. Looks pretty good, detailed. It gives everything for S3, glue, specifies, hey, we only want to focus on the specific bucket, specific database and table. Oh, glue has a database and a table. Okay. I'll need to like dive more deeper into that because I'm confused. But I know I at least understand that Athena is used for doing the query actions. Um, but anyways, then we get into kind of the struggles that I had. So in the video, Alicia is alluding to executing this not in like VS Code, but in AWS Cloud Shell. So the problem is there is some context that I think was important, and I think what was important is just identifying, whether or not, hey, are we doing this in our root user? Are we creating a separate admin? Are we creating a specific user for this project? Like, yes, you can say, hey, you got to learn, but I don't know. I'm very meticulous and try to go through the details. So for me, in my brain, I was like, oh man, I don't understand. So I had to like basically muck through the mud, and that's exactly what the 2 to 3 hour video was for. And if people want that, I mean, I'm more than happy to, um, maybe post uh, an additional video of 2 to 3 hours. So if people want that, let me know. But the article does talk about it. The code does have it. You can look at my GitHub. But basically, the cloud, like I wanted to do it properly. So if you're going to build a project and you're going to do something specific, it's going to be production. You need user accounts that have very specific permissions, and they have nothing else that they don't need, right? So if they're going to be doing A, B, C, or D, then you want that user to have only those permissions, right? The problem is obviously I was using an admin user, so it wasn't clear if it was like, hey, just do this in your admin user. Don't worry about building permissions. But if you're curious or want to, that's where maybe I was confused. You can build a specific role for the user and so on and so forth. The other challenge, so here you can see the Cloud Shell permissions, specifically for being able to just get into the Cloud Shell, because I couldn't even use it when I created the new user, right? And then I provided user guides from Amazon AWS documentation. And then this big part right here. So AWS users, permissions, and secrets. So you need to know going into AWS. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not showing you. So essentially, this is the Cloud Shell. These are the permissions. I tried to make it like as user friendly, but I tried to explain. So like the delete object, that wasn't in there. So, or was it delete object or delete bucket? Hold on. Nope. Because if you look in here, delete bucket. That's what it's supposed to be. Delete bucket. I made that incorrect. I'll fix this right now. Right here. Live. Okay, because I want to get done with this. So it's supposed to be bucket. There we go. Save. Okay. All right. So yeah, so delete bucket wasn't in there, and so when you go to NBA, and hopefully I didn't make a mistake, and I'm about to call myself out. Let's go here. Yes, so you can see this was the stuff I copy and pasted. So delete objects in there, but not delete bucket. You got list bucket because it's only this, so that's why you don't have list my buckets, plural, right? That's why that permission is not there because we're only focused on one bucket. Also, something to keep in mind is when you're with this user, like if you create a brand new user for this whole project, which I know not anybody's going to do, they're just going to do the project so they can post it. Totally understand, but it's important that you learn the security aspect of it. You need a specific user, but when you go into it, you're thinking, hey, I can be able to see these users or the S3 buckets. You can't, because you have to be able to have the permission to list all of the buckets, which I have a problem with. If you have the permission to see a single bucket, you should still be able to see that bucket. Everything else is gone. You shouldn't need list all buckets. If you still have the list bucket permission, you still should be able to see that single bucket. That's the whole point. Hey, I don't want you to be able to do everything. I want you to do some things. I don't want you to be able to touch all the buckets. I want you to only touch this bucket, right? But how do you do that? I guess maybe you could say you give them that permission. I'll have to test that later. You give them that one permission, and then so giving the list, maybe okay, I think that makes sense. So if you give them list all buckets, it's just needed, and then you can granularly, maybe that's what it is. Okay, I'm probably figuring it out as I go. But to respect y'all's time, let's dive back in. Okay, so if I missed jumping back and forth, I apologize. I'm trying my best to remember. But I had to add the delete bucket permission, and then going back here, you can see that there is no Cloud Shell permissions. So that's another thing I had to add. I had to add these, so you can actually copy and paste this if you want to use it. And then you can see more information there. And then going back to the AWS users and permissions, so you guys can actually see it now. Sorry about that. You need to know going into AWS that everything, and I mean everything, is built upon users, groups, roles, and policies. If you're watching an AWS tutorial, please note that whatever the teacher is referring to that seems like something is missing, it could very well be that they may, quotations, be working within the root user or maybe a separate admin account, right? And it is a bad practice. AWS even says don't do that. Create a specific user, and I know they would prefer you do the IAM identity center, I think, and then you use like, for example, add Microsoft Entra or anything like that. Basically, you use other platforms to manage the identity. And then you, as an but it goes more bigger into like having AWS organization and stuff like that. But if you're just like a small team, you don't need all that. You can just focus on just the regular IAM, use proper roles and stuff. I'll get into that in just a moment. So basically, just working in that root user is bad security practice. You should have a secondary user at minimum that has admin permissions and is properly secured with MFA, password policies, etc. I believe in physical security keys. I do have one. I do use passkeys as well, but for the root user, physical key, bar none. Make sure that root user is protected in all possible ways. And then from there, figuring out permissions that are needed to do things in AWS can be a pain. Yes, there are docs and how-to guides, etc., but it's not necessarily that easy. And I'm talking about that right now. Like, you'll go through so many hours of troubleshooting trying to figure it out. Now, again, I go into and said, AWS does a great job telling you what permissions specifically you need to enable access to whatever you're doing. But keep in mind, though, it will never be just one permission, right? Like rare scenarios all you need is glue get table, right? Like you can see here, I had to get all of this just to be able to use the shell. And then when I got in there, I was struggling with whether I needed. There is another permission, STS permission, allows you to assume roles. I thought I needed that. Tested it. You don't need that. Documentation sometimes will say it. ChatGPT, again, check sources. ChatGPT is not always right, but it just helps point you in the right direction, right? Sometimes it's right. Sometimes it's right, but not always. So don't take it for fact. Usually it's good to prompt it to look for documentation. So if you're paying for ChatGPT Pro, not O1 Pro, but just ChatGPT, the subscription, you can use the web. I think you can use the web in the regular one. Anyways, the point is just make sure you prompt it correctly to look at the documentation, and that it shows you the sources. Okay, the other problem is the .env file in the Cloud Shell. So in the video, Alicia just hard codes everything. I don't think that's a good idea. Listen, all these cloud engineers, these teachers, they're just trying to build an environment to help you learn so you get a lot of takeaways. But I will always harp on security best I can. And if I'm doing something incorrectly that you guys think, hey, that's not best security, please call me out. I'm not here trying to say that I'm perfect. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to use what I've learned. I got my Security Plus. I know it's just a basic certification, but like I got it, right? So I know some things, and I'm just trying to utilize it in everything I do, so that I can make sure that I'm, being security focused, right? I think I also have the Microsoft Security Basic. I'd like to get the AWS Security Basic as well, or the Security Fundamentals. So what's really cool is just like in here. All right, so what I want to show you guys is when you go into, I think it's SRC. So let me go to SRC. Okay, so we have the .env, right? So when you create the shell, okay, and in the video she shows you it's hard-coded, you can just create a .env file and then put the information, like your variables, right? You can put that in there and then just reference it like normal, because in the script, you're importing everything. And then here's another thing that they don't talk about, but that's important, is when you get everything installed. So this isn't going to be correct. I actually had a virtual environment. It's where you do the Python -m vmviv, and then you name it whatever. I did MBA stats. You can name yours whatever. And then it creates a virtual environment. I highly advise this, but be careful. Be careful. Super careful. And I'll show you why. Because I did not do this. And essentially, you don't want the virtual environment folder, which if you use, when it gets created, it is a hidden folder. When you go to commit, it will commit thousands of files. I made that mistake. I had to fix it. It was annoying. You do learn, actually. You do learn how to fix that problem. It's a good mistake. In your own personal lab, great mistake, because you can learn how to fix it. It is annoying, though. Just heads up. And then you'll think you didn't do it correctly, but when you go to commit, it has to commit that it was deleted, because you already committed the files. So when you go to recommit, it's recommitting the deletions. So hopefully I understand that correctly. I believe I do. Okay, so that was basically it. So I wanted to show you, because I had that, and my goal is every project I want to get better and better. I want to reuse code if I can, because as programmers, if you do one thing more than once, it's a variable, right? So if you do code more than once, you should reuse it if you can. And it also saves time too, right? And then we get into the S3 bucket creation logic. So it's not that bad. it was just, it was mentioned in the video that we want to make sure that the S3 bucket it exists, but really all that was happening was we were doing print statements, and I'm annoyed with doing things just to do them. So I really wanted to make sure that it was done correctly, and I was going bonkers, which is where this library comes from. I'm trying to look at logs and understand what's going on, and it wasn't until I remembered, oh wait, was it in day 2? No, it was in day 1. In day 1, we already handled that, right? So even though it's a class, so you got to remove self, I was able to just reuse that code. So I went in here and I just copy and pasted it, remove self, and we're good. So that was basically it. And I tested it and everything worked. And I just kind of left the client error library in there, and it's fine. You can leave the exceptions and leave it like normal, like the code that's provided, but I just left that in there. And then what I like about it though is like it's not going to do anything. So it's a try except right here, right? You technically could do a conditional, and you could argue maybe I did or did not do the right thing, but I just decided, hey, let's just do it. Let's try it. And then worst case scenario, this is going to do the same thing. It's going to, basically, we're going to create the S3 bucket, right? So we're getting almost to 30 minutes here. I mean, that's essentially it. We go through, we create the glue database. In this function, we fetch the NBA data, the players' data. And then we basically take it from normal JSON to JSON line delimited, which means it breaks everything down to just one line at a time. So each line is its own object. And then here, this is the function where we upload the data to S3. We have the line delimited data. We have the file key, the object key, which creates basically the file path, and it creates the file, the JSON limited line delimited JSON, right? And then it creates the object, and it puts it to the S3 client. And then here we create the glue table, right? So this is the data that we're pulling from the JSON object, and we're basically creating. You hard code this, but this is the data that we're looking for to create the table, right? And then we go into Athena and we're building the queries. So you want to create the database if it doesn't exist. And that's essentially it. You can go in there and run queries if you'd like. And that's basically it. And then the main is just running all those consecutively. And then we get into the deletion to make sure you get everything cleaned up. Shout out to Alicia. Appreciate you making this. And by no means could I say right off the top of my head if I could write this code myself. So that's not my intention of adding or giving my opinions there. But I'm very good at looking at something that exists and saying, hey, how can I make that better? So that's essentially where that comes from. Very grateful for this opportunity to build this. But essentially my takeaways are IAM is huge. IAM is huge. You want to make sure that when you're building a project, which I'm going to do moving forward in the next videos, because I think there's already 2 videos out that I need to work on. And I'm trying to adjust my approach. And I think what I've found, from today's experience is focus on just doing everything, getting everything written up. Get your GitHub squared away. Get your Medium blog, your LinkedIn, just get all of it squared away. Because then you can, once you've already gone through everything, you've experienced it, then you can talk about it. I think the problem was I was trying to do it for the first couple of days and then record, which wasn't bad. I mean, it's still not bad. You can get some good clips. But basically, it's just better to have the perspective, which is what I have now. And I understand it more talking about it, and obviously focus on test. That's basically it. I mean, AWS has a lot of services, and you can learn a lot. But the goal is just do things so that you can dive into what you've done. My biggest thing I'm trying to do is try to add to what the teachers of this DevOps challenge is what they're providing us. Like, try to add to it. What can you do to make it better? And I feel like that's what I did in this code by adding code that was already existing from day one. So that's cool. Sometimes you don't need to do too much, but if you understand the logic behind what you're trying to do, you can, approach it from a different perspective, right? And then that was pretty much it. I didn't really add anything else to the code, but except for the IAM role. And then I just procedurally did things a little differently than the video. Yeah, I mean, I really got to learn because the Cloud Shell is just like Linux. I mean, if you're gonna, it is Linux actually, but it's just, if you want to learn, Raspberry Pis are great. I would advise buying one. I have one on my desk right now. I don't want to ramble. That's pretty much it. I'm just trying my best to make these videos, make the articles, make this happen, post it, do it, move on, learn, get the takeaways, and document it. This has been a great experience, man. I'm really excited. I mean, I have proof that I have done things in AWS. I mean, I have certification, but that doesn't mean anything. This is the experience. I want to really kind of point that out. Like, this is the experience you need. When you get these certs, do things like this. Dive into groups. Learn. If it's free, that's even better. If you don't have the money, then, do that. But anyways, that's about it. We're at 32 minutes. I'm just going to post this video probably tomorrow morning because I'm going to go spend time with my family and eat dinner. But yeah, I just want to make sure I got this recorded, make a video, move on, learn, get better, so on and so forth. Anyways, guys, thank you for joining. Thank you for watching. If you found value, let me know in the comments. I know I'm kind of going fast in this video. Forgive me, and I missed a couple of times where I swapped this or switched the scenes there. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. I mean, do you like this style? Do you not like this style? I'm posting these videos regardless. So Bennett, if you're watching, thanks. Who else? Morgan. I know Teresa's put this video on for Morgan. So Morgan, I love you, sweetie. And Teresa, thanks for putting it on for her. But yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.